Welcome. My name is Pete Tseronis, and I am your host today, where we're going to have a conversation with two amazing individuals, cool dudes, thought leaders, change agents. The list can go on, talking about telecommunications, critical infrastructure, innovation, transformation, stuff that is happening in our country today, moving the needle towards a more resilient, reliable, critical infrastructure. We're going to talk about spectrum. We're going to talk about technology and the integration. And I'm just honored and excited to be here with Ryan and Jeff. My name's, again, Pete Tseronis. I used to work in the federal government. I know a little bit about this space. And from a credibility standpoint, I studied telecommunications in grad school at Johns Hopkins. And I'm a big fan of talking about where folks went to school, only because you never know who's watching and has a connection in that realm. But again, super honored, and shout out to Anterix for just continuing to pioneer and collaborate and push this topic to the front and center. So I'm going to do a little bit, Ryan and Jeff, and not going to read your bio, but I'm going to give a little bit about each of you. Ryan Gerbrandt, Chief Operating Officer for almost 3 years now at Anterix. Also 13 years as Managing Director for Trillion, a global IIoT smart cities company. He's also an RF former in a former life, but still probably today, an RF network engineer, telecom engineer, and he understands the utility sector. So if that does it for you, it sure as heck does it for me. This guy knows this stuff. By way to the University of Manitoba, where Billy the Bison is the mascot. Ryan, great to see you.
Likewise, Pete. Pleasure to be here.
All right, love it. And then on the other side of this discussion, or alongside this discussion, Mr. Jeff Levy, Vice President for Infrastructure and Shared Services at Xcel, which is one of the awesome utilities in our country, really driving the transformation agenda. I'll let Jeff, you talk a little bit about Xcel, but 20 years leading this IT initiative that is what we touch on every day, whether it's us watching our kids on TikTok or the latest gizmo we have. IT and its impact on humanity, well, that train left the station, and now it's a matter of staying current and securing those communications in a world that's ubiquitously connected. I've read a lot about Jeff, gotten to know him. He's a true change agent. He's super smart. He's all about culture and changing culture, and that's one of the most challenging things we see today when companies like Anterix and Xcel are trying to move that needle. But I also think of him as, like me, he's one of those connector kind of dudes, somebody who knows how to make change happen through people. Wisconsin Badger that he is. All right, Ryan Gerbrandt, fill in a little blanks and talk a bit about your passion and purpose in this journey you've been on. And then Jeff, you're going to do the same.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete. Yeah, great background. So I started my journey, as you said, kind of a little over 20 years ago with a smaller utility up in Canada called Manitoba Hydro. And kind of as a telecom engineer at the time, I saw the opportunity of what I really felt like communications, and connectivity and data and control could really mean to transform kind of the modern energy grid. And, had an opportunity to take that learned knowledge, from the direct utility experience that I had as a telecom and RF engineer and, bring it to the Valley, with Trillion and now ultimately with Anterix. And it just excites me, to be able to sit here and have this conversation today, with thought leaders like Jeff after, the work that we've been doing with Xcel Energy, really starting to talk more about the transformational qualities that a network can bring, to the modern grid. And, it's been a long time coming in my perspective to be able to sit down and have that kind of a conversation around the role of telecom, which somewhat has been in the bowels of the utility industry for a long time. But man, is that changing fast. And it excites me to know people like Jeff, who share that passion and are taking big strides, with Xcel Energy to be able to really put that into practice.
Love it. And Ryan, Anterix, will get into the companies and the passion that, holistically Anterix is about, largest holder of licensed spectrum in the 900 megahertz range. For our audience, look, we're going to use some terms. We're going to encourage you to Google those terms. If we say CBRS, if we say private LTE, if we talk gigahertz and megahertz, it's a lot. We're here to educate, inform, and enlighten, but also try to hope that you walk away from this and want to learn more, because it never gets old. And to Ryan, your point, the world changes every day. Just watch, folks, or read the Wall Street Journal or whatever it is that you read in Bloomberg. Technology is impacting life. Physical disasters happen. People are shooting down utilities. Lines are falling down and causing wildfires. Knowing how all this works and how technology can and hopefully create a more resilient, reliable country shout out to Anterix and Xcel for kind of being those pioneers. Jeff, talk a little bit about your background and your passion and purpose, and we want to get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Thanks, Ryan, for having me as part of the panel. So, I've had about 25 years experience in technology across a wide array of industries here at Xcel Energy over the last almost 3 years. This is my first stint in the utility space. And one of the questions I remember when I was getting interviewed here is, why do you want to come to utility? And I look back and said, my whole career has really been based and geared in IT infrastructure, whether it was servers, desktop, network, and expanded into applications and corporate services. It's really, all that background from an infrastructure standpoint coming to the ultimate company that is an infrastructure company for, the United States. And that was one of the big excitements to me in looking at where we were at from a change perspective, with renewing and upgrading what's going on across our energy grid and the role that technology plays in there. So for my past being in aerospace and defense industry, manufacturing, I was in telecom for a brief period of time back at MCI WorldCom back in the late 90s, and more recently in a nonprofit organization as well. So you see a lot of different challenges across different industries and really bringing that history here and really making a difference and a change with how Xcel Energy operates its IT supporting the company.
No, I appreciate that big time. And again, this title, Xcel's Journey to 900 Megahertz Private LTE, I think there's going to be a lot of shaping of your story because it's about people, process, and technology, and having ambassadors, evangelists, and frankly, influencers like yourself. I'm excited to hear about those challenges, but also the opportunity, and awesome stuff, Jeff. And being a former IT guy myself who fell into this world of OT that Ryan knows so well, I think it'll be interesting to hear you wax poetic a bit on the IT and OT integration that's happening around distributed energy and so forth. And before I come right back to you, Jeff, with a question, I just want to get for the audience some context. There are 16 critical infrastructure sectors in our country. We're not talking about, just energy. We're talking about, those 16, holistically in terms of we need spectrum. We need it to be, obviously, if not already understood, recognized as critical to those sectors so that we can communicate wirelessly, wired, what have you. And a company like Xcel that, represents, if I'm not mistaken, 8 Western, Midwestern states. Think of the power grid, yes, as the network of networks that requires fundamentally really smart people and really smart technologies working together as we embrace a world that in the tech world talks like zero trust, cyber protection, no perimeters, no borders, because we all want to have access through our devices. We want to talk to sensors on power grids, and we worry about falling lines on telecom wires. Well, it needs spectrum. It needs really smart people and companies who work together, not in a silo. So again, context for folks and what we're going to get into. All right, Jeff, sucked a little air out there so you can get your neurons fired up. A little more about Xcel Energy and maybe some of its strategic priorities as we finish out a calendar year and look forward to the new calendar year.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So, for those not really familiar with Xcel Energy, we're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and provide, energy-related products, services to about 3.7 million electric and 2.1 million natural gas customers. So every day we're powering millions of homes, businesses, communities across, the 8 states and across 4 operating companies. So really Minnesota, Colorado, parts of Texas, New Mexico, Wisconsin, North, South Dakota, as well as Michigan. So we're really separated across a wide geographic area. And when you talk about some of our enterprise priorities, it's really about leading the clean energy transition. Xcel was one of the first companies to come out and say we want to be 80% carbon free by 2030 and 100% carbon free electricity by 2050. So we're leading that transition and making that happen across our footprint. Second, enhance the customer experience. What are you getting out of us from an information standpoint? How do you better understand what you're consuming from an electricity standpoint, from a gas perspective, what can you do, giving you better insights to better manage and keep your bills low. And that third priority is really about keeping bills low. We're making the right decisions as an organization, doing the right investments to lead that clean energy transition, but then also keeping in mind, what are we doing effectively to help keep customer bills as low as possible through all that, and giving them information that they can make active decisions upon.
I love that. And Ryan, I'm going to come to you to talk a little bit about maybe a little deeper why this is such a cornerstone or bedrock to Anterix. This we're moving to a new economy. Yes, people don't think of green and clean as tree hugging. It's more like, wait a minute, maybe we can leverage distributed resources to keep our grid more resilient or create a more resilient grid. And Jeff, to close out, I loved the garnering insights. Data is the fuel. Data with context is information, and the more insights we have with sensors and ubiquitously connected devices, I think you as a utility understand how important that is to your customers. So awesome stuff. Ryan, this convergence, and again, a little bit about Anterix, but the convergence, and hearing Jeff talk about this, hey, somebody's got to lead and then folks can follow, but wireless broadband, the intersection of utility and telecom, why is this such a heartbeat of Anterix?
Yeah, great question. It just fires me up to hear Jeff kind of talk about the big picture strategies, that kind of underpins all of this stuff. Because let me paint it this way, that I look at this as really, an aspect of a digital transformation. As we think about the important role of data and how to use a communications technology to be able to open access to, all these different applications. And, I see broadband, and so private LTE, what makes it really unique, compared to the other narrowband and more, specific for purpose application networks that we've seen out there before, is that its holistic nature, derived from standards, globally adopted, really makes it the digital foundation, that's fundamental to being able to, help utilities like Jeff and Xcel really support a lot of these, kind of modern energy challenges. And there's so many of them, start to bubble up. You hit on cyber already, Pete, and kind of what we need to do to further enhance those aspects. The storm going through right now, in terms of, the ability to be more resilient and build, more reliability directly into the grid, in some of these disastrous and sometimes catastrophic weather events that unfortunately we're seeing more and more. Jeff hit on the clean energy transition, distributed energy, decarbonization. We'll probably talk more about that in some use cases in a bit, but that dramatically changes the landscape about the devices that we need to connect to, and so does it drive the requirements about how we have to connect to them. Across all of that, it's just the growing need for real-time situational awareness. The grid is more complicated, than it was before, and is going to get more complicated as we drive distributed assets, and we try to extract more and more from it as we push to clean. And the ability to monitor that and control it, we're going to put more sensors out in the grid to be able to help us with that. And just as you said, all of those kinds of assets are digital. They all create data. They're generators of information. And our ability to consume that data, and start to get more advanced with AI and machine learning, I just see that as really the future of where this all goes. But that requires a platform. It requires a different approach for us to be able to look at it. And, a couple other tidbits, while, we're going to come back and talk a lot about Xcel, what really intrigues me about LTE and broadband is just how different a lot of the utilities are approaching it, which I think speaks to the transferability of its capabilities into a wide range of different applications and use cases that can be really customized, to exactly what an individual utility's priorities are. Ameren, for example, they were really focused on network convergence. They had this grown connected estate, up to 22 separate networks that, they saw an opportunity to converge those separate isolated systems down into one private LTE broadband network, clearly bringing a lot of synergies and opportunity for them to, improve the cost efficiency and just the operations side of how you operate those systems. You referenced wildfire mitigation, Pete, too. San Diego, as a lot of folks might recall, has really been focused on the West Coast about how to continue to enhance their, wildfire mitigation position. And the ability to adopt, what's described as a falling conductor protection system, was one of the core applications that really drove the need for broadband. That the raw capability for that system had existed in the substations for quite some while, but having low latency, high reliability communication out to the field and the sensors that you need to be able to enable that was transformational. It made that kind of an application possible, which lets us use broadband networking, really to help a mission critical application. And there's so many more. I think that's really exciting me about kind of why this convergence is happening. Pete, to go back to your question, that, we see these use cases, we see it in the growing ecosystem. And, I really believe it's kind of the tip of the iceberg right now about where and how we're seeing the utilization of these broadband networks, and who knows what's going to come, over the long life cycle of adoption. I'm sure Xcel will be a leader in that, as we continue to see this evolve.
Great points. And Jeff, I'm going to come back and we're going to begin this kind of maybe filter it in throughout the journey you were on to be the connector / the translator / the storyteller. I worked at the Department of Energy for 8 years of my 25 in government. I was the CTO there. And my job, as I tell people, was to be the connective tissue officer, the guy who literally would knock on a door and say, here's why cloud matters to the fossil energy community or to the electricity community or to whomever, because there is a translation. There is a fear of that stuff that is not operational technology, which we all know if you Google OT and IT or read any cyber executive order, it's become a thing, a topic of conversation, the convergence, to use Ryan's point. So, Jeff, why don't you, if you can, begin when it was your job and you felt the need to start what I call knocking on doors, getting your 8 affiliates or folks to understand this is something that doesn't happen overnight, but it's something we probably should seriously consider doing, that journey to 900 and to get folks on board. Can you kind of start laying some of that foundation for us to understand the challenge?
I think when we started, this predates my arrival at Xcel Energy back in 2019 early. It really started, I think, as more of an IT communications vehicle. And as I came in and saw what we were trying to do, it became clear we really needed to get involvement from the business units. Our gas partners, our distribution, our transmission, and our energy supply groups, and going, what do we need to provide to them, and what are they expecting from a network communications environment? And I think that was a missing gap early on in realizing, hey, it's not just out, buying data circuits from a company or buying cell phones or something. You're building a communications network for running and operating the OT side of the house for, RTU devices, other SCADA units, gathering all that data that you were talking about that you can make decisions upon. And without that conversation happening and understanding what are their real needs, where are they going, where are they trying to drive to, it just kind of came across like it was an IT project. And the sooner we started to get them more involved, that's when, I'll say the wheel stopped spinning in the mud, and, momentum started to happen. And then, that kind of brought us into the next phase of, okay, who else do we need to bring to the table?
Well said. It's it takes a village, and it takes somebody who's like, come on, you got to hear this. There's some good, bad, and indifferent, and dispel myth. Ryan,
I got to add one point to that, actually, Pete. I love the way Jeff put that. And we've been seeing this across. We've talked about kind of the growing interest, into the other C-level parts of the organization. I think that's part of what Jeff's getting at is that, I come back to again, these are very strategic programs when you start looking at the big picture, and I think that's what helps drive some of that elevation in these other organizations. There's so much tactical good that comes out of a broadband network, that utilities are going to see, but its ability to enable and connect with some of these larger opportunities, like clean energy transitions and be a supportive foundational technology, has a great value and necessity to be in the, C-suite conversation in the boardroom. We're even seeing, who are acknowledging, where the risks are to the utility and what they're trying to overcome. And, I think to Jeff's point, starting to see this transition out of it being perceived as a solely an IT application, into something much bigger, which brings all of those organizational, aspects into play.
Yeah, and great points, and thank you for riffing off that. I was going to come and ask you a little bit about, from your perspective, the great work Anterix is doing to build that community and become one of those trusted partners to a utility. I mean, the technology will take care of itself. And again, everybody watching, go to dhs.gov and search critical infrastructure. You'll see the very sectors that both Anterix and Xcel are a part of in helping to enable the transformation. But these are the sectors we as human beings, humanity, depend on. And when it's at risk, all you have to do is recognize and hope that utilities like Xcel and companies like Anterix are burning that midnight oil to keep lights on and lives safe. So, Ryan, partnerships and being a spectrum company and the repositioning, branding / just peeling back a layer and saying we're more than that. Anterix has created communities of trust and practice with the UBBA and its ecosystem. Can you just talk about that and some of the value that your utility sector is benefiting from?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for recognizing that, Pete. There's so much more to this clearly than spectrum, right? Yes, nothing to be shy about. That is the core of our business. And we're proud of the spectrum holdings that we have, and we believe in, kind of low band 900 megahertz spectrum is foundational and very well suited, as the foundational spectrum are able to build these kind of networks on top. But we've made our mission much bigger than that. Obviously, we want to see successful outcomes as a result of adoption of broadband and private LTE, and that really puts it on us to be able to help with the development, the education, and the growth of the overall sector. You highlighted one part of that, and that's the growing development of the ecosystem. An ecosystem now I'll highlight that has over 90 members associated with it that are uniquely focused on helping develop solutions and technology stacks and all the pieces that's going to hopefully make Jeff successful as we put all these different parts together. And as Jeff, I'm sure will tell you, I mean, that's critical, right? And Jeff needs a strong ecosystem of suppliers around him to be able to make sure he's got the right technology and that it fits into the unique needs that the utilities have. And at the same time, be evergreen, be forward compatible and start to support the long-term, prospects that we see really for these opportunities. But you also hit on some other ones. There's a massive amount of education that plays out in the market to be able to move the needle when we're building and developing an opportunity for something like broadband adoption. Utility Broadband Alliance is one that you referenced, Pete, which is really the education's ground where, we now have, a couple dozen, I think, utilities participating in it, which is just fantastic as a way to not just learn and get educated, but as we see, kind of these first movers move forward, the ability to share their experiences, share their lessons learned, it's so powerful. And one of the value props that I really see of the nation's utilities is the fact that they're non-competitive and, the ability to share those experiences and lessons learned that can help their peers and everybody else involved in the process really get up to speed faster and, frankly, to some extent, not make the mistakes that they made, while they were working through it. And we've had some great, robust conversations about that. And same thing goes with just the rest of the industry association. So EEI, NARUC, where the utility commissions come together to get educated, the organizations like EPRI, that drive a big part of the engineering and standardization work for the space. It's great organizations that can be advocates for broadband, in their own way. They all play and participate in a different level in the organization. And probably even more relevant to right now, Pete, you'd be really familiar with, through the DOE, support organizations like FERC. Of course, we're right now in the middle of participating in, various, funding opportunities, BIL specifically. And, we've put our efforts into, all the way back to the beginning of the drafting of the language to the BIL program to make sure that it was well understood the foundational role that broadband could play. And we're successful in seeing that language flow through into multiple sections of the BIL application. And now helping utilities, and others in the ecosystem participate. These are all things that we believe are core to, Anterix and things that we want to do for the industry. But bringing it back to Jeff, these are long-term partnerships. Dare I use the word, Jeff, and hopefully you would agree. We're going to be together, for 20 to 40 years, supporting Jeff and all the aspects of his development. And we measure our success by Jeff's success and by Xcel Energy's success. We want to be there shoulder to shoulder with him, helping through, the different aspects, both good and bad, as we continue to build out these networks. It's how we learn. It's how we help Jeff, with getting access to what we're seeing in the ecosystem. And if we can just play a little part, in terms of helping to identify a new solution or something that may not be on the radar of Jeff and team as they're building out their systems, I think we've done our job. And, it's a great place for us to be. And, I'm proud of what we've been able to do already in this short period of time to be able to establish our helpful role to the industry. And I think really trying to help champion the movement that is broadband wireless.
Ryan, awesome stuff. And Jeff, I'd like to hear your perspective on just seeing a company like Anterix that is creating, convening, collaborating, right? That's a role someone has to own. And now it's this amazing, whether it's going to events or having a role in the formation of UBBA. Can you talk a little bit about that partnership and the trust that's being cultivated and fostered and how important that is now that you have seemingly gotten your own organization to say, let's go, let's do this. And now you've got a willing and awesome partner in Anterix.
Yeah, that's a great points overall that Ryan talked about. And I think we're seeing that, going through, the negotiation phase and kind of our own journey of understanding and even narrowing in on, this was the right spectrum for, our business cases and use cases, and really sitting down and understanding more the value of what Anterix brings, not only from just, they're the provider and seller of the spectrum, but here's the host of companies and the industry knowledge that they've got with the employees and staff that they have there. I mean, we've already had some conversations with their team where, I'll kind of relate it to, after you go through building a house, or if you've been through that scenario, you kind of go, yeah, I think I could be the general contractor for building the next house. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, do I do this step now or do I do this step later? And that's some of the guidance they're already giving. So things like, hey, we thought maybe originally like 6 months from now, we should start talking about new SIM chips and that sort of thing, where it's like, hey, it makes more sense to start doing that a little earlier, and here's why. So they've got that experience in working across the industry and with some of the partners. They're also, with the alliance and the partnerships they're bringing, we've got some of the same partners in other areas. We've done a lot of work with our own LMR and microwave towers and other things, and we're seeing a different side of those companies and the partnership that Anterix has with some of those, and even some new people that are coming to the table. So they're giving us, almost like kind of like your offensive coordinator talking to you in the ear a little bit about, hey, here's things to look out for, here's things to understand. And it's given us a little more guidance as we go and have conversations and things like that about what we need to do to build out and run our environment.
Yeah, that's great. It's a two-way street too, Jeff. I was just going to add, right? I mean, I think that's what's so fascinating about the relationships is that, so hopefully we are transferring some knowledge. We're learning so much, Pete, as I'm sure you can appreciate, right? We're able to take that in. And when you think about that, even just across the customers, that we're public with, who are pursuing it with Ameren and Evergy and San Diego, and, we learn from each other, and, hopefully can be a conduit to, take and, compress some of that learning, and then being able to help drive and influence the next in line or each other. And so it's such a reciprocal relationship that I see that kind of helps everybody ultimately evolve this opportunity quicker.
Yeah, you both see that too with, a lot of, my team, they've got long-standing relationships with some of the other utilities. So they're talking amongst each other and go, hey, what did you learn from your deployment, or where you're at in some of these? So when you talk about Ameren, where they're maybe a year ahead of us, so we're seeing in real time what they've just gone through and understood, and that's going to be helpful. And I think that's one of the key differences that's a really positive join in the utility industry. Everybody's partnering. It takes a lot to run the U.S. energy grid, and we're not competing necessarily with each other. We're trying to run something for the United States, and we're reliant on each other through transmission and both on electric and gas pipelines and networks. So we've got to partner and work together and share that best practice information. And, Ryan talked UBBA is a great example of that. And there's others, out there. And, it's just something I've been continuing to be pleased and surprised with from an industry and talking with each of the other utilities.
The term open government was ushered in 2009, which really has three principles: being more collaborative, more transparent, more participatory as a government. And that's, if you remember those days, I mean, I'm aging myself, I'm 55, but this is when President Obama came in. It was like, look, we can learn from industry. The government doesn't always lead. There's, as Ryan pointed out, we're throwing terms around, folks: FERC, NERC. There are roles, there's regulations, there's standards. We haven't talked about NIST and IoT and what they're trying to do, but this stuff, this collaborative partnership, the willingness to be at a table, to get involved with UBBA, to look at Anterix as an integrator of sorts, with its sage wisdom, is just so refreshing. I will say that as resident in this country, that companies are serving the greater good. So shout out to that. And I just want to say, for all the listeners and watchers here, the bipartisan infrastructure law that Ryan brought up, there's $64 billion plus, specifically in the broadband section. So go check that out at whether you search on build.gov or critical infrastructure bill. You got to be aware of the money that's out there and the purpose it's serving in terms of mission. A utility has a mission in the energy space that's different than the water space. Excuse me. So let's geek out for a minute, Ryan, because there are people, I'm sure, thinking, well, wireless, LTE, broadband. Why is private LTE and wireless broadband, say, unique in terms of other alternatives?
Yeah, good question. We hit on a couple of the pieces already, I think, in terms of what makes it foundational, right? Kind of the fact that broadband. Maybe take a step back. Broadband, has its inherent capabilities. We're talking about a broader pipe, which means more data, lower latency, kind of the technical attributes that really drives, the pros and cons of communications, at least wireless communications technology. But I think the fundamental thing here, that really makes it different is that we are now talking about building networks on a global standard-based technology. And I think that's transformational. That changes the way we should think about it. That we've been now able to tap into a global standard organization called the 3GPP. And, what 3GPP defines for everybody who's not familiar, is the industry standards for what we see, in these kind of technologies. So LTE, 4G, 5G, it's the global organization that drives standardization around that. And the reason that's important is, as it relates back to the ecosystem, is there's an alignment across all the ecosystem participants about what it really means to build products and solutions and technologies that supports that standards. And, to an organization like Xcel and Jeff, what that means is, they can go select now from, a wide variety of technology partners to be able to provide complementary pieces of the solution that they know as a function of standards is going to be compatible with the overall system and the architecture that they've chosen. And that's a game changer compared to working with proprietary systems where, you're really narrowed in on working with a very small set, sometimes exclusive set of suppliers, as you're building your roadmap and your technology stack. And, it manifests itself in terms of not just that optionality, but more competition in terms of R&D dollars and all of that. But I think it sets us up for this exciting future state where, because it's standards, we're going to see the development, the garage entrepreneur, as I like to call it, who's a small company that's going to be out there with some great idea, that didn't have access to Jeff for, frankly, his networking systems in the past. I could conceive as building the next great innovation that's going to be, just earth shattering in terms of how we're going to bring efficiencies or improve reliability. By building that onto an architecture that Jeff has adopted with LTE, I could see Jeff enabling it or embracing it, right? Once it's tested and validated, being able to move that through without having to, lift and replace every other aspect of the IT infrastructure. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's a big difference in terms of how we should think about broadband. And then we talked about all the other supporters and stuff already, Pete, in terms of just the plethora of companies that come as a result of all of that are also just laser focused on, helping utilities, with these, these fundamental mission critical opportunities and challenges that they face, there's a lot of horsepower, a lot of mind share, that's being driven in to try to help solve these problems. And, I think that's enabled by this kind of technology and this platform.
Yeah, Ryan, that's a great point. And as we were looking at, what our spectrum options were, there's a lot of spectrum available that isn't in that 3GPP standard. And you start to look at what would that mean if you went down that path? And, it's up to the company to start working with the manufacturers to get product and chips and get the software built and encoded to enable all that. And that's a lot to take on. And is that a relationship and something that's core to your business and core to what you want to do? Or is it something that at the end of the day, you want to consume the service that's available and have an ecosystem, of different partners that are on that standard? It was a big decision to, make and I think it'll turn out to be the right one, because you see the size of the ecosystem and the partners that are out there building products on that, utilizing that, so you can, so to speak, plug and play as updates and things come out down the road. That was a real key for us, that we wanted to stay within that standard.
Let me riff on that for a minute, because you actually answered a question I was looking to drive toward, and that is this technology due diligence. Right here, Jeff, there's the navigate the halls and buildings and states and sea level to the ground level to the folks who maintain the equipment at Xcel on. There's promise in technology and transformation, and there's risk. There's cyber risk, physical risk, network risk. There's risk, and it's about mitigating. And that's where I, being an IT kind of guy, say, look, there's no silver bullet. You have to conduct the due diligence. You have to find the partners. And it sounds like you've been doing that, and would love to dive into that a bit more, because you hit on options. And, there are a lot. Anterix with this ecosystem, there's, would you say, Ryan, 90 or so? Yep. Each one of those companies is unique and has a capability that could become a custom solution. So can you, Jeff, talk a little bit about, now that you've got this great partner in Anterix, is there an effort on your part, IT guy, that you self-stated? How do you start to differentiate certain needs and requirements for Xcel?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a couple of the core principles that you look at. What was the reason? Why did we do this? Sometimes if you start with the what and you go back and start with, like, when you're really thinking about building a business case, and go, why are we doing this? Why are we looking at doing that? And, we really kind of came back around on it. It's really about resiliency. It's really about security and reliability. So when you're looking at that, and when you think about, that's kind of the fundamentals of what an energy provider is trying to do. You want to be resilient, you want to be available, you want to be secure, all of that. And, that's where I'd say we're, really starting with that. And as we look at what are those new things that the business is looking to do. So we know there's, things like RTUs, SCADA devices, we're running, as part of AMI with running smart meters and how you collect that with, field area networks or FAN. We know those business cases and use cases that we want to go deploy this upon. But there's a lot of new stuff that's coming out there. We don't have, fully figured out, what is going to happen with EV, what's going to happen with DERMS, what's going to happen with microgrids, and what's that communication that we're going to need to have to, gain data of insight and control. But, when we look at this, we're going to have this network available, across, our footprint, starting, our initial deployments really focused on, kind of a 27 county, what we're calling service territory 1, that covers about 80% of our customer base. We're going to have this in place. So as these new capabilities start to materialize and we go, hey, we have this, does the bandwidth that this provides, the network coverage, the capability, and then with the ecosystem of the partners that are out there, does all of this work to help solve the problem of what the business is trying to do? And that's where we're trying to get a little bit ahead of that, because seeing how long it takes to deploy something, when you're talking about, we've got 130 some thousand, square miles of coverage, across our 8 states. It's a immense territory to cover. And, we can't do that in, a year, even 2 years. It's a big effort to get out there and cover that. So, we're kind of going through a phased deployment and focus where our customers are and start to develop those future use cases. And, I'd be remiss not to mention, you talked earlier about like wildfire suppression, but getting that out into areas where that is critical. And we need to have that. We want to have that communication vehicle there where if this is the right thing for that, we want to be able to, partner with our transmission partners and others across the business to have that available.
Ryan, do you want to riff or comment on any of that before I jump in with a question? Because you're really good at riffing.
I mean, I think all I can say is I agree with Jeff on all of that. Awesome. No doubt, I think the reinforcement and just bringing it back to bubble it up and where he started is those core aspects of it, with the focus on cyber protections, enhancing those capabilities, generally reliability, resiliency, and stuff like that. Those are common threads, right? We do see that, and I think it speaks highly to the focus that, not just Xcel, but really what we're seeing across all the nation's utilities, really, paying attention to the core aspects of their provision as an electric service company or a gas service company, in terms of how they ultimately have to put it together. Here's one that's not being talked about, but just capturing kind of the relevance of the timing of it. I actually live in North Carolina and, have been paying deep attention to, the gunshot damage that happened at Duke Energy's substations. It's an application and a use case that I think will be talked about, and continue to be talked about what else can we do. It's going to be, I'll venture to say, near impossible to try to protect necessarily, every physical asset that we have out there as a nation. But certainly there's, digital technologies, whether it's audio or video or whatever it is, to help us to be more prepared. And, it's a sad state of reality, but, those kinds of solutions, are things that I'm sure will be explored, to add to, complement what the utilities already have to be able to help prepare us for another set of defenses to be able to, help to ensure we've got safe, reliable, and clean, affordable energy.
Ryan, security cameras are a great one, Ryan, where once you have this coverage over a wireless area, I think, more from a physical security and being able to see more of what's going on at substations or critical, infrastructure points. We're seeing more and more of that, even, motion detection, other things that you really have to get down in the physical security. And when you have a wireless network available to be able to capture that, it opens up the possibilities and it helps with risk reduction. And I think that was one of the other areas as we, started to, talk more with our business units and the functional areas is really, risk reduction, loss, property damage, et cetera. And when you have, the network capability to do more coverage, that opens up an area that you can get into now, where before it's difficult, or you figure out how do you do this, or how many wireless devices do you need to deploy and manage and secure and all that.
For both of you, and it's making me think about, here's two industry thought leaders in companies that are thought leading, and it's an industry that's been around for a long time, and we're dealing with the most complicated network arguably in this country, and that's so much connectivity with investor-owned utilities to some co-ops and munis. And one of the topics that comes up a lot inside the Beltway is how do you embrace this innovation? How do you get excited if you're a utility that doesn't have the resources? And that's where this discussion of cloud comes in. And I just wanted to pivot to cloud, and however you folks want to answer. This is look, you've got all this ecosystem of partners, Ryan. I would imagine just distilling what's unique about each. Can you speak to some of the use cases or opportunities that you see, putting on your vision hat here? I mean, you've done work with a national lab at NREL. Talk a little bit about that and what excites you, because having a lot of something requires a lot of really smart people saying, what makes sense for our customer.
Yeah, excellent. And I'll broaden it even a little bit more, Pete, if you don't mind. When I think about advancements, kind of in the technology, and this comes back to getting down into a mainstream, standardized product line too. Cloud, edge intelligence, AI, machine learning, big data. I think we're squarely setting ourselves up as an industry, to find the right opportunities to participate in some of those major R&D investments that we all hear about as, just listen to the tech news and you're going to hear something about that. And I think it does create opportunities, as we look to the future about what we can do with these systems. We spoke about kind of the generalities of data, but as at the heart of all of this, once Jeff and Xcel, deploy the system and connect the devices, they're now going to have a standardized, kind of a normalized and centralized, data warehouse, a data lake per se, of information of all these digital assets. Now think about it, that's one utility. When we start aggregating that information and we can take learnings from not just what Xcel sees across their 8 states of coverage, but compare and contrast it potentially to what other states are seeing. I think of this as a use case of security for an example, to help us through analytics, and other pieces of intelligence, be able to deduce threats and detect them at a national level, impacting one single device that Jeff may have 10 of, and, San Diego may have 20 of, and I mean, the scenario, right? And you can do that because of the aggregation and, ultimately the standardization on these systems. And, that's exciting, and I think edge comes into play in a lot of different aspects. We've not talked yet about really kind of what I would consider to be kind of ultra low latency, or, where it's better to not transverse all the data from a device all the way up to the head end or the cloud and then make a command call and then push the information all the way back down. I don't doubt it. We're going to see applications that require, far more command and control architecture out closer to where the command is going to be executed. And again, one of the advantages of LTE and the 3GPP standard, is it's evolving to that. It's built for that, right? So Jeff will be able to embrace that kind of when and where it's needed. And as it relates to the cloud, I'm a believer, there's a journey to get to the cloud. There's lots of questions and stuff that, we're actually investing our time in to be able to look at, how to ensure it's secure, what information should be in the cloud versus on premise, and how to put it together in a smart way that meets the needs of utilities. But there's no doubt, the advantages of hyperscaling, the economics of it, the ability to ramp it up and ramp it down opens up all kinds of opportunities to help scale organizations like Jeff and Xcel, in terms of how to drive more rapid prototyping and new applications and use cases and stuff like that. But that's me kind of as an outsider to the utility. I'm actually more interested in what Jeff thinks about some of that stuff.
Yeah, Jeff, and again, in the context of IT, this cloud and analytics, we referenced the work and the partnership that Anterix has had with the National Renewable Energy Lab, and not to forget the National Cyber Center of Excellence, Ryan, which I was reading about, your collaborative partnerships. Jeff, you hear cloud, about AI and machine learning and big data and data lakes. I mean, what are some of those IT capabilities that you feel, will enable that secure, reliable, resilient infrastructure? If you could take it down a level to give the IT folks out there, whether it's situational awareness or visibility, what are some of the things utilities need today for things like restoration or dynamic response or balancing loads? I mean, how do you map those requirements at a utility level to the promise of IT?
Yeah, in the utility, it's a little difficult because in some of those areas you're dealing with OT, and OT and cloud don't necessarily equate by any means. But information, like you talk about, like meter data, so information coming from meters that you can gain information and understand what's consuming, and gain some some insights on what's happening out there. That can help drive behavior and help, achieve better costs, as an example. Some other things, that I know we're doing, cloud-wise is with drones. We're doing a lot with drones. We're doing a lot with, heat mapping of different areas so we can see, differences with that. And we're doing some, AI sorts of activities along that. We're doing, things with vegetation management, et cetera, to take advantage of what you can do. I mean, there's there's so much with drones, and I think this is an area we're going to take a hard look at with, private LTE, where instead, you're flying that around, and then you've got to bring it down, you got to download the data, then you got to go drive someplace, you got to upload it. Where if they could do that in more of a near, it's probably not a need for a real time, but more near real time, where they can get that in there and start to see and understand what's going on. Those are just a couple of the areas. We're obviously doing other things in cloud from an IT perspective that we've been adopting and had in place for years, and continue to grow that. And we see more and more opportunity in cloud, whether that's cloud services directly or SaaS solutions.
Ryan, you're nodding. You want to jump in, or?
No, I agree with him.
Okay.
I think the point he made, I think, to start was the recognition of, kind of the necessities and the needs of the OT client, right? The operational networks, those devices and stuff, I think was spot on. I didn't mention that, but, kind of that recognition that we started the conversation kind of this way, that there's this understanding, of the difference between what we're talking about with an OT device or an OT application and an OT network, that can certainly take advantage of some of these IT tools, but we do need to respect the differences. What is unique about monitoring these kind of mission critical systems, and the way that we use tools and we talk about tools definitely, can be different depending on what kind of problems and what type of data, what type of network we're ultimately talking about.
Yeah, I know we have 6 minutes and we have parting shots, but I think we have one little more a point to make, and I'm riffing here myself. The promise of technology, Jeff, you really got into this world of IoT. Ryan, the industrial Internet of Things is different. And I think you hit on something so basic, Jeff, and thank you. And that is, imagine what it's like, pre-IT to what a utility operator needed to do in a rural part of the country, right? There's generation, transmission, distribution. And I appreciate what you shared about leveraging technology, but that also means have an efficiency so we can make decisions quickly, not download it, put it on a drive, load it up here. So that really resonated with me. And Ryan, I guess, I was just going to come back to this IoT. Could each of you just comment on how do you see this government part of the equation, right? Government, industry, and academia are all working together to move the needle. How are those partnerships going in your personal and as well as from a perspective at your business engaging with the government?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's good. I kind of hit on a few of the organizations that we've worked with, whether it was for the BIL funding or just kind of, finding like-minded interests across these different organizations that you've spent your career in, Pete. They're in Washington with DOE, FERC, these kind of organizations, CISA, NIST, all these different places. They're important stakeholders, right? We want to make sure they're fully aware of what role a broadband wireless network can play, and that, we have as a nation this kind of a toolkit available to us as we're thinking about the other aspects, that drive modernization. And some of that can be policy, and some of that can be influence, and some of it can be just sheer gathering the interests, towards the direction of the common good. And so I do find it helpful as we work our way through it. Jeff will probably certainly have more the perspective of, one of the unique things that I saw in terms of the conversation with Xcel is, they're operating within 8 states, as Jeff said. It's got different state regulatory influences and all these kinds of things. There's a lot of different pressures and interests and priorities that have to be worked through. I don't know if Jeff, you wanted to kind of add anything to the color there.
Yeah, it's it's something that we talk a lot about with what can we do to help enable, more, whether you're talking about broadband into rural, states and municipalities, and what role can a utility play in that? And I think there's, some partnership opportunities, across where, it's not our, ultimate use case necessarily to deploy this for end user consumer information, gathering. But, we've got, a lot of transmission towers and things that, cross into the, rural areas. And is there opportunities with, some of the telecom providers to, share, towers and infrastructure, and, talking with some other utilities, some of the partnerships they're seeing with, you don't even understand, like some of the, state patrol and some of the network capabilities that they have and towers that they have available, and in some of that sharing there. For some of the government agency things, we're obviously working with IIJA on some potential funding paths for some of our deployments, and getting that out there so we can gain better insights on what's happening in some of the rural areas for managing the grid.
Jeff and Ryan, a word you've used a lot, or words you've used end in the letter Y, and you just hit on one I think that's critical, and that's equity. 42 billion plus for broadband equity access and deployment. I think, and I'm sensing maybe another discussion for an hour or so on just rural broadband and the move to help the disadvantaged, the underserved, and the unserved. So that's my little mini parting shot. Mindful of time, we got 2 minutes, and that's plenty of time for 30-second parting shot. So I'd love to hear, I think the audience with, let's go with Ryan to start, takeaways from today and insight you gleaned. What do you want to share? And then Jeff, you, and we'll close this out.
Absolutely. Let me make it quick. Three things to me. This is an industry accustomed with sharing information, lesson learned. Take advantage. I mean, if you're out there, utility, or an ecosystem partner, you're trying to figure out something through this. I know people like Jeff are, very generous, but, are consumed with time. But we will share, right? This is an industry that wants to have best practices out there and wants people to participate. Frankly, as an industry collective, the more holistically we do things like move forward with broadband, it helps all of us. It helps the entire industry and it helps the entire ecosystem. I think that's important. The second one is there's other places to learn. Join organizations like Utility Broadband Alliance or EVA. It's a fantastic place, with a condensed focus of interest of like-minded organizations and different levels and different people in the organization, all the way up to CIOs and COOs, who are very actively involved in that conversation that can help share that knowledge. And the third, and I think highlighting, the relationship that hopefully comes across that Jeff and I have, look for partners. I really think it's important, as we're building this stuff out. And like I said earlier, I take a lot of pride in that role and what that means, and I respect a ton from it. And Jeff knows he's got my commitment as we work our way through this, that we're going to be there to help. But I think it's important, in the technology realm that we're in right now, that we have partners like Anterix that can work with utilities like Xcel, who have a broader focus and interest to do the right thing, to be able to see this stuff be successful and move the needle forward.
Love it. What a trifecta. Jeff, close us out.
Yeah, and I'll just say from, the Xcel Energy side and for other, companies, utilities looking at, going down this path, I'd give a couple points of advice. One, treat it like an enterprise problem, not an IT problem. Figure out what is the thing that you're trying to solve. Start with the why and develop the business case based off of that. Get the right engagement model with leadership across the company. This isn't something that an IT group is going to go solve, go get funding for and go do all by themselves. You've got to get the right ecosystem of people inside and then get out and start talking with, external companies that provide this sort of service and understand what their capabilities are. And then, I think lastly, understand, the business value it's going to bring is going to be different to every department and maybe division within your company. From a business unit standpoint, what gas might be looking for versus maybe distribution or transmission or energy supply. And then also internally from whether that's your security group, your risk management group, finance groups, regulatory groups. Everybody's got something that this can help provide and has different perspective on this, and really treating it like it's a business problem that you're trying to solve. And I think you're going to find great partnerships across your organization to really help solve this.
Hey, I know we went over a little, but thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Ryan. I loved being a part of it. I learned something. I was educated. I was a bit informed, and I sure as heck was enlightened. We hope the audience was as well. We hope to do this again soon. Thank you to you both, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Ryan.